Welcome to this explainer. You know, for a huge chunk of American history, women were legally barred from voting in national elections. And the story of how American women finally won that right, well, it is definitely not a story of a quick legislative fix. It's actually an epic, multi-generational saga. Changing the law of the land required decades of organized effort, unyielding determination, and just incredible persistence from generations of activists. So today, we're going to explore exactly how they pulled it off.
Take a look at this number, 72. That is exactly how many years this fight required. We're not talking about a campaign that lasted a few months or even a couple of years. This was a grueling 72-year battle. Just let that sink in for a second. Grandmothers, mothers, and daughters literally fought for a right they weren't even sure they would live to see realized. Okay, let's dive right into this with part 1, Sparking the Movement, where it all began. The sheer span of this struggle is honestly staggering. We are starting all the way back in 1848 at Seneca Falls, tracking our way through crucial state-level victories like Wyoming in 1869, before we finally hit national ratification in 1920. Keeping this visual roadmap in mind is really going to help anchor you as we explore just how long and demanding this decades-long struggle truly was. So our starting line is 1848. The organized effort to secure voting rights for women in the U.S. really traces its formal beginnings back to the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. You've got key organizers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott spearheading the whole thing. And it was here that they boldly called for expanded rights for women, specifically demanding suffrage, the right to vote. Now, progress toward an actual constitutional amendment remained agonizingly slow through the second half of the 1800s. Activists spent those decades doing the heavy lifting, organizing conventions, drafting petitions, and running public campaigns to lay all that essential groundwork. Which brings us to part 2, states lead the way, local level progress. Now, here's a fascinating piece of the puzzle. Individual states and territories actually began granting women voting rights well before the federal government even budged. The Wyoming Territory became the absolute first to do this in 1869, which was a massive breakthrough. By the early 1900s, this paved the way for several other Western states to follow suit, granting either full or partial voting rights. But we have to remember, most of the country still had not adopted these rights. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the movement itself was divided in its approach. On one hand, you had the National American Women's Suffrage Association, led by iconic figures like Susan B. Anthony and Carrie Chapman Catt, and they leaned heavily into conventional organizational strategies. On the other hand, you had a different, much more assertive faction led by Alice Paul. She favored direct, in-your-face pressure, organizing highly visible public protests and demonstrations. And honestly, these dual approaches, the meticulous organization from one side and the assertive public pressure from the other, created a wildly powerful dynamic. Moving right along to part 3, a world at war. Momentum shifts. Then the whole game changed. The movement gained massive, undeniable momentum during World War I. Women completely stepped up to make substantial contributions to the war effort, taking on critical roles on the home front and in all sorts of support capacities. This was a huge turning point. The combination of those sustained public demonstrations and these vital wartime contributions dramatically strengthened the political arguments for full citizenship rights. The logic just became undeniable in Congress. If women were taking on the heavy burdens of citizenship during wartime, they absolutely deserved the voting rights of full citizens.
And that takes us right into part 4, ratification and reality, the final push.
Let's move to and see how this builds through the final legal hurdles.
In June 1919, all that wartime political momentum pushed Congress to finally pass the 19th Amendment. But passing Congress wasn't the end of it. It still required ratification by 3/4 of the states to actually become part of the U.S. Constitution. That absolute nail-biter of a conclusion arrived on August 18, 1920, when Tennessee became the final deciding state to ratify the amendment.
So, let's clearly define what was actually achieved here. The 19th Amendment officially prohibited denying the right to vote based on sex. For the very first time in American history, women across the United States were legally granted the right to vote in federal elections. It was a truly monumental victory for American democracy, and it was the direct result of more than 7 decades of relentless, highly organized activism. However, we have to look at the historical reality here, and historians always point out a critical nuance about what happened post-1920. In practice, full and equal voting access for all women remained a serious, ongoing struggle. Many women of color, particularly in the South, continued to face massive discriminatory barriers to voting for decades afterward. This was due to broader discriminatory laws and practices that remained firmly in effect at the state and local levels. So while the 19th Amendment was a historic, monumental legal milestone, the actual on-the-ground fight for equal access at the ballot box continued.
All right, let's wrap this up with Part 5, on to the Roaring '20s. A new era begins.
Which leaves us with one final, fascinating question. The 19th Amendment transformed American democracy in 1920. So what happened next in the Roaring '20s? You've got millions of women who suddenly have a voice at the federal ballot box, stepping right into a decade famous for huge cultural, social, and economic shifts. How did this newfound political power mix with the Jazz Age, the economic boom, and the rapidly changing roles of women in society? Well, that is an incredible story for our next chapter. Keep this timeline in mind, and I will see you in the next explainer as we dive headfirst into the